All right. Hey, I'm AJ McMahon. Welcome back to Overcoming ADHD. That's the framework we use because your child or a child or those children that you care about can have a lot of different challenges. And we're looking at the framework of ADHD, which is a popular connotation for youth when they're struggling. A lot of times, when youth are struggling with different challenges, they can be diagnosed with ADHD. And there's a lot of complexities to that I look forward to you continuing to tap into our journey together as we look at the realities, the actualities, the facts, the accurate information that can really empower you in your journey to understand your child, a child, those children, so that you can be empowered in your parenting and your caregiving and your professionalism because you want to see a child overcome challenges. And that's why we're here, because we know, we believe, or we hope better for our child than what we've been experiencing. And today, we're going to talk about trauma informed care, which is a framework that I'm just going to use, just a general definition, so we can have this to talk about from the internet. It says trauma informed care is a framework that recognizes the widespread impact of trauma, seeking to understand a person's behavior by asking what happened to you rather than what's wrong with you. And of course, we want to get away from these idea thinking of children as like what's wrong with you. Of course, we know with compassion, with understanding, with sensitivity, with awareness, we're not trying to look at children and blame them or shame them or do anything like that. We want to understand where they come from, what may be going on. A lot of our children have experienced some type of trauma, unfortunately. If your child hasn't, that doesn't mean that they don't have challenges that you're working with. You may be wondering whether they have had some type of trauma or impact, or something happened to them at school or with friends or away, the impact of bullying or adoption or loss. We can think about many different factors that can impact a child. And in my over 28 years of working with children and families, I've come to understand that there could be so many different avenues and challenges that a child and a family can face. Well, we're here because your child is struggling and you're trying to understand how to empower them. And we're going to look at it from a lens today of trauma informed care, but a little differently. And I know here that we do things a little bit differently. We talk a little bit differently. We explore it a little bit differently because most of the time it's underneath where the richest goes to have an impact and empower your child like never before. So as we dig in, and we're not leprechauns or anything, but as we're trying to get to this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which means that your hopes are fulfilled for your child, and maybe even a faith that's beyond your imagining is brought to fruition, we get this opportunity to look at trauma informed care. Now, trauma informed care principles, those of you who are pretty familiar with it, you're likely immersed in it to some degree. You've had some exposure, some study, application in your work with a child. Okay. So, what often is happening are I see many people, many families, many professionals are operating in the lens and with care at the forefront, yet the child continues to struggle. And so, what we want to look at is beyond trauma informed care. Okay. It's not to replace or dismiss in any way trauma informed care. It's just to say that human beings, children, we are designed by a creator to be very complex. There are many dynamics to us and what may be factors that are playing into our challenges. And a lot of time, it is the complex factors beyond trauma that are influencing the child and the emotional and behavioral and even academic challenges that they're having. We get an opportunity to look at things like inner temperament. And I've talked about inner temperament on this channel because it's so important, it's so vital that we understand that children, we know they're unique human beings. We think about personality, but we also want to think about how they're motivated because motivation plays such a huge factor. When we look at inner temperament, primarily there are three inner temperaments that can operate with a child, where one temperament is usually dominant, one is usually secondary, and one is tertiary. We'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. But Dominant inner temperaments can be one of three. The first we're going to talk about is the compliant temperament. These children want to please the boss, those in authority. They're motivated from within to comply, to be responsible, to obey, to go along. Doesn't mean they don't have challenges, but usually they're more easily redirected. The second inner temperament, the slow to warm up. Those children don't want to make waves. They don't want to be in the spotlight. They can time to warm up. A lot of times this is associated with the middle child, but not always. Birth order can have some effects, but not to put them in a box. But this child may be the child that goes to the playground and they're hesitant, they're clinging to your leg. But if you give them time, they'll warm up, and they'll get into things. They might be the one that looks at the diving board and then goes stands on the edge of the diving board, and then they run back, and finally, eventually, while you're talking to a friend or something, not looking, you hear this splash and there they go, they jumped, right? So, the slow to warm up, but they don't want to upset the boss typically. So they may take a little bit more redirection with things, but typically they don't want to upset the boss. Then you have the strong-willed temperament. We hear about the strong-willed child, but most of the time there's really no definition for that. We might say, "Oh, this child is a strong-willed child." We recognize that, but when it comes to treatment, when it comes to understanding, when it comes to awareness, when it comes to being able to operate in a way to empower them, there's no real application of that. There's no real application of, okay, so since you have a strong-willed child, here's what that means, here's how that impacts them, and here's what you do about it. Most of the time, we're usually looking at the child in a trauma lens, or we're looking at them in a, let's say, disorder lens, okay? But there's the inner temperament. The strong-willed child wants to be the boss. They're internally motivated from within to have life on their terms. They march to the beat of their own drum. They push with caregivers, especially when they feel like there's opportunities to do so. And mainly that comes out with female caregivers, because female caregivers are excel typically with compassion, the lighter touch, the more understanding. But children, the strong with children that want to be the boss, often want to take advantage of this. And this can be like, oh, we're talking about children and they're taking advantage and different things like that. But we got to recognize that they're children. They're still people. They're human beings. They're not bad or disordered or maladaptive. They just may have maladaptive patterns because they're motivated from within to have life on their terms. And yes, they can be motivated to take advantage, right? Taking advantage just means the artful or manipulation. The definition of that is pretty much just the artful, skillful way to try to get what you want. We can say maladaptive behavior patterns, which means that somebody has developed patterns of operating to get their needs and wants met that may not be the best functionally, societally, or in our families. But listen, we've got to understand that children are complex. They're motivated maybe by their inner temperament. They're motivated maybe differently. A lot of children aren't motivated to go to school or to sit still or to go to bed early or to eat their vegetables. And yes, we're having or to brush their teeth, and think about all these battles and challenges. Or they're motivated to stay home and listen to you talk to them about the meanings of life and what's best for them. No, children aren't typically motivated for these things. They aren't. The things that are good in their life is not what necessarily is important for their life. A lot of times, what's good in their life can be the things that going outside, being free, doing what they want, staying up, eating what they want, being on the tablet, not really doing their schoolwork. For a child, those can be the things that can be important in their life, right? Let's look at it from their point of view. But what's important for their life, for all the things you're trying to bring to fruition. And when you're operating in a framework of trauma-informed care, a lot of times the focus is so much on the trauma. There's so much attribution to the trauma that we're really neglecting the opportunity to see the child from a holistic perspective, to look at them as a developing person, to be able to lean into brain development and those factors that say that the prefrontal cortex is the final part to fully develop when we're in our mid-20s by that theory. And that we recognize the prefrontal cortex is responsible for impulse control, mood regulation, and judgment. Do you know any children that have trouble with that? Yes, we do. Our children struggle with this. So, what we get an opportunity to do is look at a holistic picture. Yeah, trauma may have played a part, but is it playing a part now, or what part? Here's some things I want you to really look at with your child. One, when you look at your child and the principles of trauma informed care, how long have certain challenges been going on? How long have they continued to struggle in certain areas? Okay. Now, when you think about that, think about that there may be intermittent periods where they have breakthrough symptoms or the challenges arise and there's periods where they don't. But overall, how long have they continued to struggle with these particular challenges? Now, what how would you categorize what is a main thread or theme that runs into a lot of the challenges that your child has? For some of you this can be more easily identifiable than others, but when are they typically struggling? Are they typically struggling when they are confronted with something that they don't want to do, or it may not be as appealing as what they're doing now? Are they typically struggling when they need to do something that may be difficult, like certain academics or academics in general, not based on their intelligence, but more based on their own motivation? Again, that what's important in their life may not be what's important for their life, right? That's what we're trying to bring about. When does your child have trouble? When do they lash out at a brother or a sister, but they won't lash out at a certain adult, right? If it's just trauma, if it's just that they have trouble with anger or impulse control, if it's just ADHD, I know we can have all these explanations for why they may focus or have more self control or do better in one area. But if we can just push all that to side for a minute, we could just take a deep breath, clear all that, start with almost a blank slate, and just say, this is a child, a wonderful, created, complex human being. But let's just break it down. If we kind of put aside the trauma, if we put aside the ADHD, we put aside all the explanations, let's just look at the patterns. What patterns are you noticing in when they have challenges and when they don't? And if you need time to identify those, that's okay. Because when you really apply yourself, you start to see the patterns and just think of them as a child, as a human being, not with all these complexities of disorder, dysfunction, trauma, what have you, divergence, etc. Right? Think about your child and the struggles that they may be having in the areas. What may be some commonalities, some common links? Is it typically when they're told to do something? Do they have trouble listening or following through with tasks? Do they have trouble obeying the first time? Do they have trouble with self control, but in specific areas? Are they more prone to operate in a certain classroom and do better than others? What makes the difference there? What we get an opportunity to do is try to understand our child from a fundamental level, because from that place we can create a foundation of empowerment to say, okay, I'm starting to understand that my child is has these patterns going on. And even if we wherever we are with the patterns, that's an important element. One thing is that we can identify. We'll come back to the patterns in a minute. But one thing we can identify is how are the relationships between you and your child? Now, not talking about the struggles, the hardships, the frustrations, but do you think your child feels loved? Whether they've been with you since birth, whether they're adopted, whether you've just been with them not long, whether you're a professional, you might want to look at it as a professional as, did the child you're working with are know you genuinely care about them, just in the way you operate, you handle yourself, your intentions, those kind of things, not going anything out of bounds, but just in that general way, right? So many children know that they're loved. They know that they're cared about. They are getting adequate attention. That's not why they're actually having the trouble. Because in that framework, we can say, okay, this child knows that they're loved. They know that they're cared about. That is a key factor. Now, when we get back to the patterns, We can try to identify the patterns and what may be going on. And we can kind of say, you know what, some of this behavior, because behavior at the core level makes sense. Behavior at a core level makes sense. And what can be so empowering to us as caregivers and professionals is just try to make some sense of what's going on. Here's where we can have trouble with the trauma informed care because we can look at it in the lens and say, okay, this makes sense that they have this trauma, but it doesn't really inform what to do about it because, regardless of us trying to operate and implement these trauma informed care principles, the children continue to have these struggles. And so we want to keep the trauma informed care principles. We want to remember the relationship and understand that the child likely feels loved or cared about. We want to take an opportunity to try to identify the patterns and try to make some sense of what might be going on beyond the disorder lens, beyond the trauma informed care lens, but just from a developmental, from a child perspective, just understanding it through their lens. And here's where the true wisdom comes in because so many times I'm talking to people and they're just talking in a natural sense about what they think is going on, why they think their child may be having the difficulties. And in plain language, a lot of times they have this fundamental, deep understanding beyond what it's kind of interesting. They'll say, yeah, I think my child, I tell them to do something and they just don't want to do it. They want to do what they want to do. But then they almost want to dismiss that. They want to say, no, but it's because of trauma and they're children. Maybe that's just the case. That it's a child, that what's important in their life is not necessarily what's important for their life. And yes, they may have had trauma. So the other thing we want to do about that is to say, okay, how have I been able to give my child opportunities and resources to address any trauma? Have they had counseling? Have they been in counseling? Are they in counseling? Have talked about and looked at the dynamics that can give them the opportunity in the past or the present, or even if they're not willing to do counseling right now, maybe that when they're ready, we know we're going to provide that opportunity for them to engage in counseling. So the resource is there, right? Or has been there, or will be there if needed. So that's the access to really be able to address the trauma. But when it comes to behavior, we can be able to say, okay, they're loved or cared for. We can work on that if we need to, right? But we have a pretty good indication that's the case. We can try to make some sense of what may be going on with the behavior, some of the patterns, some of the understanding from the developmental perspective, right? That, okay, depending on age, right? If their brain is fully developed in their mid 20s and the child is 14 or 12 or 10, right? Then we can recognize that the most dominant parts of the brain are responsible for impulses and feelings and emotions and the big feelings and those kind of things, not for judgment. We can understand from a developmental perspective. We can also understand that we get to train up a child in the way they should go. And when they're old, they will not depart from it. We get a chance to train. We get a chance to lock in a plan that makes sense to be able to address the patterns developmentally, to say they're loved, they're cared for, think may be going on. We think maybe they have trouble really listening, operating from a standpoint of responding to adults when they're told to do something pretty much the first or the second time. We can understand maybe they have the problems with self control, where lashing out, but which one comes first? A lot of times it's the listening. We can be able to look at a plan to be able to say, okay, I am going to recognize that you may have trauma. And here's been how we've addressed that or how we can. I'm going to recognize that you're a child. I'm going to recognize that maybe what's important for you, what for you in your life may not be what's important for your life. But I'm going to empower you by being able to understand you're a complex human being, but you're not so complex that I can't implement some principles that just kind of make sense, that I can gather around with loving caregivers that might be a immediate and direct part. Doesn't mean if you're co-parenting in separate households, you have to do it the same way. I know a lot of times, a lot of people can have frustration because that other caregiver, but you can, in your home, in your situation, in your relationship, empower a new understanding. Now, how do you do that? We're going to wrap up with this. You do that with the LEAP method. L stands for Love. I have, we recognize that you know that I love or care about you. E, we're going to create an expectation of excellence. You will do what I say the first time, or you will control yourself in these specific situations. And we got to be very specific if you want to implement a smart format, because likely your child is in a place where you need to be very specific, yes or no, pass, fail, as far as that goes, to be able to hold them with a affirming accountability. I believe in your ability to do this, and I'm going to hold you accountable, but I've got to develop a plan that holds you accountable in connection with the things that are important in your life. And I get a chance to hold you accountable on a consistent basis. There's no magic bullet. It could take weeks and months to specifically hold them accountable. You're not trying to hold them accountable for 10 things. You're only trying to hold them accountable for one thing at a time. You will go to bed at this certain time, or you will do what we say when I tell you, or um, you will have this specific routine to get out of school in the morning, or if your child is already listening to you well at home, it's you will do what the teachers say at school. You have a specific method of awareness of, did your child meet that expectation, and accountability for that day, not weeks and months where you take something or hold them something over their head or their phone, but more in a very specific, probably day, 2 days, 3 day time frame, where you're holding them accountable so that you can keep reinforcing this principle over and over and over, that I love you, you can do this, and I'm going to empower you to do this, to do this affirming accountability. And we're going to persevere, which is the P in leap, to continued consistently until likely, hopefully, you are empowered beyond your trauma, beyond your challenges, beyond the disorder, beyond what you've been labeled, beyond what people say is not possible, to be able to bring out to fruition what God has enabled and empower you to be and to do, and all that you are and all that we believe in. So beyond trauma informed care, look for a professional that can also be able to look at your child from the developmental and behavioral aspects, to bring those things together into a unified front. We're complex human beings. Awareness doesn't always mean advancement, but you can help your child advance through taking your awareness to the next level and bringing in a plan, a routine, and a structure that can empower your child and meet them where they are. Thank you for being here. Keep applying your principles of trauma informed care, but add to it, grow to that. Let there be other things that come in. And as we wrap up today, we're going to use this medical disclaimer. Uh, uh, the information on this video is for educational and informational purposes, not intended as professional medical. Always seek the advice of a qualified healthcare professional with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment. Please stay tuned, stay connected, stay involved, like and subscribe. Let's continue this journey. Bless you out there.